Hey everyone, this is Dawn. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm glad you're here. Today I'm going to show you how to make a magic slider card. We're going to do two cards, and the first one I'm going to use the Fresh Paint scrapbooking stamp set and the stamp set called All Kinds of Awesome. Okay, so this is Fresh Paint, and then I'm going to use the UR. And I'm also going to use tabs thin cuts and stitched rectangles thin cuts. And then papers from Fresh Paint, along with Capri and black cardstock. Okay, the key to this technique is using heat-resistant acetate. So the brand that I'm using is from Graphics, and I got it on Amazon. Okay, so I've cut it down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I'm going to hit it with the anti-static powder on both sides of the acetate. This tends to be very staticky, so if you powder up both sides, it'll help. And I've loaded in the star from Fresh Paint and also UR from All Kinds of Awesome into my MISTI. And I'm inking it up, both images up with Versamark ink. Okay, and I'm going to stamp on the acetate. All right, so we'll get that out of the way. And I'm going to use, I went through my stash and I found this old powder that's called blue tinsel. So just go through your stash and see what colors you like. I thought this was a nice bright blue, and it's got a little sparkle to it. So I'm powdering that up and then knocking off the excess. And then another key is to heat up your heat tool and get it going first before you start applying it to the powder, and then just keep moving it around to melt the powder. But you don't want to melt the acetate, and even though it's heat resistant, you can melt it, so be careful. Just keep your heat tool moving. All right, so I'm going to use black cardstock. I was trying to decide between Bluebird and black, and I decided on black. And I'm going to cut a frame. This is the largest frame from the stitched rectangle set. Okay. All right, so we're going to pop that out. And that's going to be my frame overlay on the top of my card. And then I remembered that I also need to cut my tab. So I did that off screen. So I cut out that shape and I'm going to stamp on it. So I went through my stamps, and this set from Cake Day Card Making Workshop has a teensy tiny word that says pull on it, a little stamp. So I'm using that. So go through your stash and see what kind of interactive stamp sets you have. Or you could just handwrite the word pull on the tab. Okay, so now I'm going, you don't have to do this, but I found it to make it a little bit easier. I'm going to put my piece of Fresh Paint paper back into my MISTI, and I'm stamping with a Sundance ink pad. It's roughly the same color. I just want kind of a guide as to where I can stamp on that back piece. All right, so I'm kind of working around that image. Okay, so I've got Capri and Bluebird, and I'm going to do ombre stamping. So I'm inking it all the way up in Capri and then just kind of rolling the bottom portion in Bluebird to stamp down the word awesome. And then I'm just going to stamp a bunch of these stars from the Fresh Paint collection and the other images that are in that stamp set all around my "You Are Awesome" sentiment in that star. So I'm just kind of going back and forth between Candy Apple and Bluebird and just scattering a whole bunch of these images around. So we'll get some more of these little stars in and just go back and forth and kind of fill up that panel. Add a few more stars and swirls. And I'm also keeping in mind that rectangle overlay is going to go around the edges, so I don't want to stamp right up to the edge there. So we'll add another star and call it good. Okay. All right. So I have off screen, I've cut 4 layers of these stitched rectangles and I've glued them all together, but I didn't glue them on one edge. And then I'm just going to cut that edge off. So I kind of want a U shape left of those stacked rectangles. Okay. And now I'm going to layer my tab in between my fresh paint patterned paper and a piece of capri, both cut at the same size. Those are about 3 3/4 by 5. And I'm going to glue them together. So I'm sandwiching that tab between those 2 pieces. Okay. And that way that will pull out smoothly. All right, now we can start building our card. I've got a A2 card base. It's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm going to do a side fold. I'm just putting that stamped base piece down on my card base. All right. Then I'm going to bring in that piece of stacked rectangles. It's a U shape, and I'm using double-sided adhesive. This is from Score Tape, and it's a nice strong adhesive, and I'm putting that down, and then my slider fits right in it. So I'm testing it to make sure it's the right size. Okay. And then I'm going to add another layer of double-sided adhesive, and then I'm going to adhere my acetate piece to the adhesive. The double-sided adhesive tends to work the best with the adhesive, with the acetate paper, as opposed to a liquid glue. Then I'll put another layer of double-sided tape down, and I forgot to put, I did it on the 3 sides, but I forgot to put it on the top. So I'm going to lift up my rectangle there and add it. And then we got a rectangle adhered to the front of the card. And there's the pull action. So your little slider comes out, and that's what makes it a magic slider. So your image changes. Pretty cool. Here's some close-up shots. It's a fun technique. You are awesome. Okay, let's make another one. So this time I'm going to use the stamp set called Academia Rose, and I'm using papers from Hope and Kindness. All right, so I've got some of the cardstock that's in Harbor, and these are the cut aparts, and they are 4 by 6. So I'm going to use that one on the right side there with all the different colors, and it's 6 inches, so I need 5 1/2. So I'm going to just trim off the top part of that. And then I'm going to cut this piece. It's in Sundance, and it's got kind of a floral design on it. So I'm going to cut that at 5 1/4 by 3 3/4. I'm kind of making sure it's going to fit inside that stitched rectangle, so the slider action will work. So I just trimmed off just a tiny bit, like about a 1/16 of an inch, just to make sure it's going to fit. So I've loaded the rose image into my MISTI. And then I've got my piece of acetate cut at 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then I'm going to powder it up with the anti-static, and I'm going to place it into my MISTI. So this time I'm using my Brutus Monroe mat because the image is larger, so it's difficult to have your magnets on there. And then I'm just going to ink up with Versamark ink on the whole image except for that lower left corner, because I don't want to have anything on that. I'm going to have something underneath it, so I don't want to emboss anything on top of it. So I'm just kind of watching where I put my ink. And this time I'm going to use some Nuvo embossing powder called Medici Crimson. It's a pretty red. And then I'll sprinkle the acetate with this embossing powder. and then knock off the excess. And then I'll heat it up and melt all of that embossing powder. Such a pretty image. And then I'll just take my microfiber cloth and buff out all of that excess anti-static powder and clean it up. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of position my overlay to figure out where I want to stamp the sentiment that's part of the Academia Rose set that says "To a Sweet Friend." So I'm going to stamp in white daisy pigment ink, and then I'm going to sprinkle some white embossing powder on top of it. I like to do the white on white rather than white on Versamark, just because it intensifies the white and makes it show up more. So I'm just brushing off a little excess with a dry paintbrush, and I'll hit it with my heat tool. And then we'll melt that. So this time my sentiment's going to be on the inside. Okay. So now I'll bring in my die cut machine, and I'm going to cut my stitched frame in Harbor. This is part of the Hope and Kindness cardstock collection. And then I'm going to cut out my tab in Harbor as well. Okay. So then I'm going to stamp the word pull, also in white pigment, on that tab. And then I'll sprinkle it with white embossing powder and then heat set it. It's really worth it to do that extra step, because then you don't have the white pigment smearing and it just pops a little bit more. Okay, now we can start assembling the card. So I've got my slider piece and another piece of Sundance, and I'm going to glue together my tab, and then I'll glue that at the top of the piece of Sundance and sandwich it in between my Sundance cardstock and my patterned paper from Hope and Kindness. Okay, so now I have a card base, and it's an A2, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 side fold, and we can start assembling. So I'm going to put that base piece down first. And then again, I've stacked 4 layers of white cardstock cut with this stitch strength rectangle. I'm going to cut out one section, and then I'll glue that down with double-sided adhesive, and then add another layer, and then I've buffed off my acetate piece again, and I'm going to lay that down on top. And then I'll add some more adhesive tape on top. But first, I'm just trimming off a little bit of excess that was on that edge there. Okay, and this time I put my adhesive on all 4 sides, and so then I can add my stitched frame on top. Okay, and then I can add in my slider. This one turned out pretty, I think. Okay, so these are both of them. So all these supplies are currently available, with the exception of the acetate, available on my online store, and I'll make a list with links in the description below. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button. I would really appreciate it, and then you'll be able to find all of my videos. And thanks for watching.